Today's submission explores the premise that financial success is a soft skill, evaluating how effectively the contrast between the patient janitor, Ronald Reed, and the bankrupt executive Richard Fuscone explains financial behavior. Let's dive straight into the feedback.
Sounds good. Let's get right into it.
So, a key theme running through this material seems to be this very straightforward contrast between Ronald Reed's, enduring patience and Richard Fuscone's destructive greed.
That's clearly laid out. I wonder, though, if we've considered whether this analysis is maybe a bit too isolated from the macroeconomic realities surrounding these two men.
I think that's a really fair point. Because if financial strategies are like sailing, well, patience is a sturdy sail, right? But if the wind completely dies out or a hurricane hits, the sail alone doesn't dictate the outcome. Are we putting too much emphasis on the sailor and not enough on the weather?
Yes, exactly. Isolating individual behavior as the sole driver of financial outcomes creates an incomplete narrative that ignores the powerful external forces of luck and systemic risk.
Right. It feels like the draft just treats them like they existed in a vacuum.
It really does. That's the core weakness here. The material relies way too heavily on attributing Reed's success exclusively to his patience and, Fuscone's failure entirely to his greed.
It's drawing this completely unbroken line between character and destiny.
Macroeconomic environments and these massive tail events that really govern their respective eras.
So how do we fix that? Because it's a great narrative, we just need to ground it.
My suggestion would be to broaden the analysis. The author needs to incorporate the principle that luck and risk are siblings.
Oh, I like that. Siblings.
Yeah. Demonstrate that while behavior is undeniably vital, obviously we aren't saying behavior doesn't matter, every financial outcome is also heavily guided by forces entirely outside of an individual's conscious effort.
Right. So to get really concrete with some examples here, I think a great starting point would be contextualizing Ronald Reed's timeline.
Yes, absolutely.
Because the draft paints him as this solitary genius of patience. But the author should explicitly point out that Reed's decades of investing perfectly coincided with the greatest economic expansion in U.S. history.
Yeah, he had a massive, multi-decade tailwind pushing that sturdy sail.
Exactly. And to really drive that point home, we could pull in that counterexample mentioned briefly in the source text, the hypothetical investor in the German or Japanese markets just prior to World War II.
Oh, wow, yeah. That is such a stark contrast.
Right? Like, think about it. If you were a deeply patient, highly frugal investor in those markets in 1939, your patience wouldn't have saved you.
No, not at all. Your local markets were literally bombed into dust.
Completely wiped out. Hyperinflation destroyed the currency. So, patience clearly is not a universal shield against catastrophic systemic risk.
It's a really sobering thought. And we need to apply that exact same macro lens to Fuscone's story, too.
Yeah, for sure.
Because if we just label Fuscone as greedy, we miss the actual mechanics of his downfall. The material really ought to explicitly note the timing of his collapse.
The 2008 crisis, right.
Exactly. Taking on all that debt to expand an 18,000 square foot mansion directly preceding the unprecedented 2008 financial crisis. I mean, that was a catastrophic manifestation of systemic risk.
It proved that bad timing can amplify bad behavior.
Exponentially. Taking on debt is a behavioral choice, sure, but the 2008 liquidity freeze, that was the weather.
If the global economy hadn't collapsed right at his moment of maximum leverage, he might have survived.
He might have just been a guy with a slightly too expensive house. Right, instead of becoming this bankrupt cautionary tale. So bringing that weather into the analysis makes it so much stronger.
I completely agree. Let's look closely at the section discussing the mechanics of how these two actually manage their wealth day to day. How Reed compounded his wealth while Fuscone aggressively levered his.
Is the connection between A and B fully established in the material, or is that an area to potentially bolster?
What do you mean by that?
Well, right now, the text almost reads like Fuscone failed simply because he lacked intelligence, like he did a dumb thing, therefore he is dumb. But he was a highly educated executive.
Right.
Are we missing a deeper mechanical failure at play here?
We definitely are. The contrast between getting wealthy and staying wealthy offers a much sharper analytical lens than simply labeling one investor as smart and the other as foolish.
That is a great way to put it.
Because the weakness here is that framing Fuscone's actions as a fundamental lack of intelligence
misses the core paradox of wealth.
Which is?
The exact skills required to amass great wealth, so relentless optimism, aggressive risk-taking, supreme confidence, those are the exact opposite of the fear and frugality required to keep it.
Ooh, that's fascinating. Sustaining wealth is practically a different sport.
Completely different. So my suggestion for this section is to reframe Fiscone's downfall as a failure of survival and a lack of a margin of safety.
A margin of safety, yeah.
Shift the narrative away from a simple morality tale about, a smart janitor and a dumb banker. Make it a mechanical explanation of how room for error acts as the ultimate protector of compounding.
Right. To give a concrete example of how to execute that, the author could draw a direct parallel to the story of Jesse Livermore from the text.
The trader from the 1929 crash, right?
Exactly. Livermore was brilliant. He made an absolute fortune during the crash by shorting the market. While everyone else was wiped out, he was thriving because of his supreme confidence and risk-taking.
So he mastered the mechanics of getting wealthy.
Yes, but then he lost everything by 1933. All of it. Why? Because he expanded his bets and his debt. He assumed he was invincible.
He couldn't transition to the mechanics of staying wealthy.
Precisely. His confidence destroyed his margin of safety. And the author can use that Livermore parallel to sharply contrast Fiscone and Reed.
Okay, let's break that down mechanically.
Well, the text notes that Fiscone's Grinch mansion costs $90,000 a month just to maintain.
$90,000 a month just to keep the lights on.
Yeah, so the author should emphasize that this massive overhead systematically destroyed his room for error. When your burn rate is that high, you require absolute, continuous perfection from the economy to survive.
And the moment perfection slips, you drown.
Exactly. Now contrast that with Ronald Reed. The author needs to emphasize that Reed's frugal lifestyle wasn't just a quaint personality quirk.
It was a structural advantage.
A massive one. It gave him an almost infinite margin of safety. His survival didn't require the economy to be perfect.
Which is why he could effortlessly survive, 14 separate recessions during his lifetime?
Exactly. His low-cost living was the mechanical shock absorber that protected his compounding over the long term.
That makes so much sense. I can see what you're going for here. Let's see how we can strengthen this even further by digging into the underlying psychology.
Yeah, the root cause.
Because we've looked at the macro environment and the mechanics of a margin of safety, but the draft still leaves the reader wondering about Fiscone's true motivations. Like, why would a highly educated, already wealthy person destroy their margin of safety in the first place?
Building on that point, what if we looked at it from the perspective of the moving goalpost and social comparison?
I think that's the missing piece. Failing to explore the psychological ceiling of social comparison leaves a gap in understanding why an already wealthy executive would rationally justify risking absolute ruin for a marginally larger house.
Right. It leaves this massive "so what" unanswered, because right now the draft dismisses his actions as mere childish stupidity.
Which is just a cop-out.
It really is. By dismissing it like that, it bypasses the compelling, albeit destructive logic of a goalpost that never stops moving. It fails to answer why the wealthy make these bizarre financial choices.
So how do we suggest the author tackle this?
They need to deepen the psychological analysis. Suggest that they explore how social comparison acts as an invisible driver.
An invisible driver, yeah.
Explain how it uniquely forces highly educated, successful individuals to break the absolute cardinal rule of finance, risking what you have and need for what you don't have and don't need.
Right, risking everything for something you don't even need. That's so powerful. Let's give some concrete examples to help the author implement this.
Okay, so the text has that great analogy of the rookie baseball player.
Oh yeah, the Mike Trout comparison.
Exactly. So the author should really integrate that. Imagine a rookie making $500,000 a year. By any standard, he's incredibly wealthy. But he plays next to Mike Trout, who makes $36 million.
So the rookie feels completely broke.
Right? And then Trout sits next to a hedge fund manager making $340 million, and suddenly Mike Trout feels inadequate.
It's an endless chain.
It is. And the author should use that to illustrate how Fiscone's 18,000 square foot mansion was likely a symptom of trying to keep up with his ultra-wealthy peers.
It wasn't just him being stupid, it was a psychological trap.
Yes. And to prove that this behavior is systemic, not just an isolated character defect, the author could reference figures like Rajat Gupta or Bernie Madoff.
Oh, that's a brilliant connection.
Because both of those men were legitimately successful. They had hundreds of millions of dollars. But they destroyed their lives, their families, and their legacies due to this insatiable appetite for more.
Because the goalpost never stops moving.
Exactly. And integrating those examples proves that Foscoto's greed wasn't some strange anomaly. It's an unwinnable psychological game. The only way to win is to refuse to play, which is exactly what Ronald Read did.
Reed wasn't playing the status game at all. His wealth was invisible.
Right, and that invisibility gave him freedom.
This is fantastic stuff. To wrap up this critique, the material possesses a really strong foundation, but can be significantly elevated by integrating three high-level concepts.
First, introduce the macroeconomic realities of luck and systemic risk to provide a complete picture of their outcomes.
You have to talk about the weather, not just the sailor.
Exactly. Second, reframe the contrast around the mechanics of getting wealthy versus staying wealthy, specifically emphasizing the necessity of a margin of safety.
Right. It's about structural survival, not just intelligence.
And finally, dig into the psychology of social comparison to explain the root motivations behind Fusconi's seemingly irrational greed.
Show the reader how the moving goalpost trap actually works.
Yes, make it a mirror for the reader.
Well said. We highly encourage the listener to implement these editorial directions and submit their revised work back in for more feedback.